Right, so where we left off was kind of a semi-functional wall. We didn't do any of the ads, but we already had some pre-built data sitting in there. During lunch, I just built out a couple of extra little pieces that we didn't quite get to during the actual presentation. I didn't build those other two functionalities. I just started building out some of the Ajax stuff that I wanted to talk about this afternoon. So Ajax stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XHTML. In order to get it to work with just regular plain old JavaScript, it's kind of a pain. Basically, you make a curl request to a server, which basically says, go and get data from this URL. When that data comes back, do something with that data. And that's kind of that when the data comes back is the key part. That's the asynchronous part. So it basically says, go somewhere, go to a server, wait around for a little while, and then when it finally comes back, do some behavior. And the reason it's so important to have that kind of asynchronicity is because normally JavaScript just like runs line by line by line by line, so there's no real waiting. So this allows some waiting to happen. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at that. So I'm going to pull up this index file. So I made the index.html file, and I'm now just loading this index.html file. So it used to just have welcome to the index, the welcome.py folder is a great place to start. I just changed that to an H1 that says welcome to the wall, and I have two divs in here, log reg and wall. So that's all I've kind of changed. All right, I'm going to comment out all of my JavaScript for a second, except for this little bit up here, which is the console log ready. All right, so we have the basic generic static style sheet that was preloaded in the platform. I'm also going and getting a version of jQuery that I have locally installed. I stuck it in my static folder. I have it in another folder called Bower Components, which you'll eventually get to talk about in the mean stack. jQuery and then jQuery.js. There's lots of different ways to get jQuery. It's super easy. You know, you can just go to Google and be like, jQuery, Google, and I'll pull up a CDN. So you guys have all done this. You guys have all dealt with jQuery, I think, in the pre kind of fundamental section. But just to remind you, all you can do is just copy this snippet of code, and you would also get your own fantastic little jQuery library. I'm loading it locally because it takes time to go to another website and get something. So to minimize the lag, I just loaded it for myself. All right. So, oops. Line 24 of my documents. Let me go fix that real quick. Sorry, let me look at what that actually is. So, user documents, pilot, welcome py, line 24. That's really big, by the way.
Yes.
Welcome py.
That's welcome. But I welcome pie too.
I don't know where that equals came from. All right, just adding random double equal signs, you know, whatever. All right, let's see if that's cool. All right, so basically it says welcome to the wall in big fat letters, as you would expect, because we're loading this wonderful, toggling through lots of things. We're just loading this wonderful index.html page. So there's that welcome to the wall. That's where it's coming from. Fantastic. We have this main chunk of our code. It has two IDs, log reg and wall. All right. Cool. The other thing that hopefully you'll notice is that I didn't comment out this console log ready. And I have this $document ready function, console log ready. Basically, all I did is I'm testing to see if my JavaScript is loading at this point. I want to see that ready show up in my console when I load this page. So let's go ahead and look up our console and notice this ready sitting here. That's the ready that's getting console logged from jQuery loading correctly. All right. Cool. All right. So let's look at some of the stuff that I commented out. So this $, that refers to jQuery. this dot refers to a method that we're calling in jQuery, and that method we're going to call is called Ajax.
So it's pre-done as Ajax like that?
Yep. Yep. That Ajax method takes a parameter, which is a dictionary, or in the case of JavaScript, an object, and that object has a bunch of different pieces that you can give to it, and it will sort them out. One of them is URL. URL says, hey, where do we go? So this is just like a route. So it'd be like clicking on a route. So just like before when we said, let's go get a new message, we'd say slash whatever, right? Like slash messages, like up here. You go slash messages, right? That's basically saying go to that route. In this case, it's messages underscore Ajax. But if we could say slash messages, and it would go to exactly this route that we're talking about right here. We could go somewhere else. We could go to like Google or something as well if we wanted to. That's outside of our localhost and do something like HTTP, something like that, and that would still be fine. Ajax doesn't care if it's a local place, if it's just slash, or if it's some other URL. It doesn't give a crap. What it's going to do is it's going to say, I'm running a GET request, this method, to that route, and if that site accepts GET requests, then whatever comes back to that from that site will come back and be stored right here in this data object. All right, cool. So let's go back to the Ajax messages. So Control Z a few times. All right, great. And basically what I said is once you get that data back, all we're going to do is basically populate that div, the wall, with that and fill its HTML with that data. Questions about that? Does that make sense? All right. So we're going to go to this route as a GET. So let's go ahead to routes and look what I put into there. All right. So our routes, we have messages underscore Ajax, and it goes to the welcomes controller and the messages underscore Ajax method. All right, so whatever gets returned from this method is what should get populated into our page. So whatever gets returned should get shoved into our wall and fill its HTML.
So what is that hash wall? The div?
So basically,
it's a div?
yeah,
Oh,
it's,
yeah,
it's this div right
Okay,
here.
perfect, yeah.
So the ID is the hash,
Sure.
and the wall is the name.
Okay.
Cool. All right, so again, this route just goes to our normal router. Our normal router catches it. That router says, okay, run welcomes messages underscore Ajax. So that goes to our welcomes controller. Our welcomes controller pops up. We hunt through our welcomes controller and see what our welcomes messages Ajax would do. Right now it's doing all this other stuff. I'm going to not have it do that for now. I'm just going to say return wonderful wall. Yay! Okay, so all it's returning is a text string. Pretty exciting. All right. Cool. So now we have to turn that method on, so we've got to go back to our index.html page and uncomment it, and let's see what happens. So again, that wonderful wall, yay, should fill up and return that string as this data here. That should then populate the HTML of wall, and we should see it output right away. So let's see what happens. Okay. All right. So this method's going to run right away, right when we load the page. So it should happen right away. All right. Yay! There it is. Wonderful wall. Yay! This is actually 2 page loads. So that's kind of the interesting thing. So the index.html page loads this chunk, and this is effectively a second page load. So let's actually clarify that a little bit and change what we actually return. Right. So this part's going to stay the same. We're just going to go into our welcomes controller and change what it returns. So we're going to actually return all the wall information. All right, so again, it goes to the database, just like the other normal full page refresh would do. Goes and gets the messages, goes and gets the comments, and then it returns a self-load view, just like our other things would do. But I'm not going and getting a whole view. I'm going to this partials folder that I created and getting this underscore messages.html file. So let's go ahead and look at that. So this is the underscore messages HTML file. All right. Notice it has no header information. It just has a partial, meaning it doesn't have every information. It just has pieces. So it has the form. It has all the logic that we wrote earlier, messages and messages, comment and comments, yada yada, form to build.
And that's what basically partial means, is that it's just got no header
Yep,
information.
exactly. All right. So what we're going to expect to have happen is we're going to load our main index page. Our Ajax call is going to go out and make a call. It's going to do the get method. It's going to go and do all these things and then return this page all populated and happy. All right, so refresh the page, and there we go. Do, 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 do. Yeah, it is really big. Okay, so it does exactly what you would expect. So this thing, if we look at it, this whole chunk, whoops, this whole chunk is all generated dynamically.
And it's just one big div that's generated on the call.
The wall div?
Yep, that's the wall div.
Okay.
All right. So let's just throw in another piece here. Let's go back to our index.html and uncomment the second chunk. All right, so what's it going to do? Yep. And where is it going to load the login and registration?
Under login reg div.
Yep. So we'd expect this thing just to populate this whole thing. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. And just refresh it. And now we get login and registration on this top chunk. Sorry, it's kind of blue and blurry. Anyways, so it basically said, okay, let's populate that top chunk, making another, basically a full request to a URL, fill it in, make a second one to fill in all this stuff. All right. So that's basically how Ajax works. Now you can imagine doing this dynamically so you could load different pieces of your page depending on what you do. So when you click one of these buttons, for example, rather than doing what you would normally do in submitting a form, you might have it do something totally different and make a Ajax request to somewhere else and be like, I want to log you in with Facebook or whatever. Because just like it can go to /messages_Ajax or login_Ajax, it could have gone to Facebook login and tried to log you in there with the data that you put into these two fields.
So let's say you've got this up and running, and
Yep.
you have multiple users.
Uh-huh.
What would you need to do so it goes and updates the data if someone else posts a message? That'd be a timed event or something?
Yes, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. So in order to do it in Ajax and JavaScript, basically you do exactly that. You basically set a listener and says every 15 seconds query the database and look for a change. And actually that whole process of kind of setting up timers and like being like waiting for things to happen is actually what led to the development of the node server. So a couple of developers were like, hey, this whole repetitive querying of the database and making these independent, Ajax calls to a server is just really, really kind of annoying. And so basically they're like, is there any better way to do this? And basically they said, let's make a handshake between the server and the client, which is what sockets are. And so it says, instead of doing that, basically have this kind of constant communication event that you don't have to be like, oh, query, catch it by the route, and go through the header information. It says, let's skip all that header information after the initial request is made, and then just basically have this kind of real-time communication event. So,
Which stack has Node.js?
so the mean stack. Yeah. So, but with Python, kind of the current strategy is basically just make these repetitive, GET requests.
Oh,
So, yeah. And then if you're not calling and hitting the database every time, they're not horrible. It will, if you had 1,000 users or 10,000 users, it would start to slow down your server for sure. You'd have to start having multiple clones of your server. But it's not the worst thing in the world. It's not like your site's going to completely die if you do that sort of strategy.
So if you're clicking on, say, the add message here, which page is that coming from? Is this coming from your...
So right now, as add message is set, it's going to do exactly what it used to do, which is it's the same exact route that it used to have. So it still has / comments, which we didn't actually build out last time, but it still run this exact form. So it basically say, whoops.
But it's just making the form dynamically. It's not coming from... All right, so if you had the submit happen and did an AJAX call to actually load the
those two divs.
Facebook information into the div below, then is the Facebook information going... Whatever you're doing in that Facebook information is what is happening on that Facebook page, correct?
It depends on how you set it up. You could just go to the Facebook API and go and get basically extra user information from the Facebook API. And that's a lot of times what people do, like when you do a Facebook login or a Google login. It's not actually going and manipulating Facebook directly, but basically it says, hey, these big sites have all this extra information, and people don't really like to log into 8 million sites. They like to be like, oh, I understand, Facebook's login, so I'm comfortable using that. And I've kind of agreed to those terms of service. And Facebook, in those terms of service, one of the things they say is that they will share that information, a subset of that information, with other users, and that's what you're getting back. And so basically you can say, kind of give somebody like, kind of a hook to your site that's something that they understand and or feel comfortable with. So, but that does bring up the question of how do we deal with form submissions and that sort of thing. Right. So right now, if we click on one of these form submissions, it's going to go and load and try to log somebody in, and it's going to do an actual full page refresh. So we'll see ready disappear really quickly, and then it reappear, and then everything else will reload. Or it should. So notice how it kind of flashed over here?
Yeah.
So that is not an AJAX call. An AJAX call won't actually cause that reload. So let's watch it and turn that into an AJAX call. All right. So things that we need to do. So first thing we need to do is we need to change our listeners in our document.ready function. So what we're going to say is document.on, and then this is the method that's going to happen, submit. And then you could pass an alternative parameter in here and say which object is submitting it, but we're going to do it for any type of submit. I don't care. Function E, and E is just the event that's generating the submit. And then we say E prevent default and let's return false as well.
So that's basically what's stopping that refresh.
Yep. So let's console log I heart donuts. So hopefully now every time we try to submit a form, instead of doing what it would normally do, which is the default event, it's going to console log I heart donuts and then not return anything. Cool. Let's see if that works. So refresh this page. All right, submit. Oh, I heart donuts. So notice there's no refresh anymore. Oh, look at all these. Oh, that's another submit. That's also a submit type. They're all adding I heart donuts. So we've basically overwritten all of our buttons now, or all of our submits to just say I heart donuts. So now that we've done that, in theory we could make another AJAX call here. And I'm going to comment out and basically move the wall AJAX request into our button click. So rather than running it right away, which is what it was doing, I'm going to say, when you do this and make that button click, also make that exact same AJAX call. All right, does that make sense? So now our page, when we load it, should just start off with index Ajax and just show the login and registration. And then when we click on one of those two buttons, it's going to load the wall. It's not going to actually do the login and registration. It's just going to. So there's that. And then when we click on this, there's the rest of the wall. No page refresh. Cool. So that was pretty much Ajax in a nutshell. You could then pass through things and be like, hey, I want to do a post action. I want to do, so notice this method that's sitting here. This could have been a post. And then the route that we catch has to be a post type of route. So let's just change this to a post. Because that's now a post, it won't work right away. So if we try to refresh this page and click something, it's going to say something. Notice this red arrow that came up? Method not allowed. How many people have seen that come up in their main page? I've seen it a bunch, right? So all it's saying is it's just printing it out over here now. Because it didn't like that method, but it didn't actually refresh the page, so it couldn't load it onto the page. It just said, hey, that's what I got back. It's garbage. Okay, so let's fix that. So go to routes, and all we have to do is now change this thing to a post. It does exactly what it used to do, but now it's going to get caught correctly. So it's going to be like, okay, so now I can actually listen to that thing, messages Ajax, and then run the messages Ajax method. So refresh it, submit, and there it is. So this opens up a whole bunch of cool doors. We'll touch on it more next week, but I thought it was kind of a fun one to kind of be like, oh, this is kind of how awesome Ajax can be and making asynchronous calls where you can just load a single page and just be like, hey, this is the page. In theory, you wouldn't have to store session data anymore because the page, once it's loaded and you're logged in. For example, let's just change this up one more time. We might want to say on our index.html, not only do we want to fill this wall with new data, we want to eliminate our login and registration. So we could have said, hey,
Stay on the same page.
Yep. Now it looks like now it will look like it's a page refresh, even though it's still on the same page.
Just empty string.
Oh yeah, thanks. Otherwise we would have gotten two.
Yeah. 2 days.
Yeah. All right, so logging in, submit. And notice this part stayed all exactly the same. Absolutely no change there. And then this stuff got reloaded. So you can imagine like having 5 different partial pieces that are all loading at different times. Like let's say you're trying to go get weather from some sort of outside API and fill that up in your right corner, right? You don't want that to affect the loading of your entire page. You want that to pop up when it's ready to pop up. Like,
Usually do something like this, to keep the header and all that stuff consistent across pages. To usually build it kind of like this way, so that doesn't actually change at all. It's just loaded.
yeah, a lot of like Angular will change what your location route looks like, and so it can store a history. But I like to run it this way. I like to have kind of a consistent page that's a single page application personally. I mean, I think it's a much smoother interface, and I like the way that Ajax works. So
when you say when it's ready to be, so is it activity based?
it
Or could it be?
it depends on what sort of requests you're trying to make. So JavaScript historically is activity based. So it's basically event driven development. Some of the newer frameworks realize that processing speed is so good now that making 1,000 requests a second isn't a big deal for a browser. And so basically a lot of things like Angular and React are basically like, I'm always listening. If there's any change, like if I start typing in here, I recognize that type, and with Charlie's demo yesterday, you saw that. So every keystroke was getting logged and caught. Angular does something even weirder, which is even if you're not typing, it's still listening for that. So
Can you change the URL, or is that always going to be a refresh?
no, you can change the URL.
And should not actually.
Yeah, it doesn't actually change the location, but you can change what it looks like.
Up in the URL.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So you be a single page application that looks like a multiple.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then you can set up your JavaScript to deliver whatever content you want according to what's showing up in the login page, or sorry, in the URL, so that a user will feel like, oh, they're going to a different page, but it's just telling your JavaScript, oh, it's this URL, I'm going to do this to a single page.
So are you going to do similar AJAX calls, say, on your navigation bar, if you're having a navigation bar on your index on your welcome page, and then all of a sudden you're logged in, and are you calling that in your nav bar as well as a separate?
Yeah, like I would adjust my nav bar to like throw in a login button or a log off button,
Right.
and just change that individual piece potentially.
And that just brings up what we were talking about yesterday, like how are we going to organize all this once you start doing stuff like that?
Cool. All right, so that was everything for today for me. Any more questions though? As I said, I'll push this up to GitHub
Okay.
along with all the videos.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
The if this is successful statement, if this is not successful statement, I think that's where I'm going to probably have more questions.
Cool.
Just because when you're logging in and you're just trying to see if against the database if the password is correct or if it's not correct, you're not really wanting to change the page, but load the.
Yeah, so you can send out partial pieces of data back, just like you would have with a normal, the same strategy that you would have normally loaded your page. You can put your flash errors in or whatever. So
The success function could have asked a question like, is what I got back telling me that it's okay to display the rest to make another call?
Yeah.
Or do I have to say, oh, you